Thermaltake have come out strong with the introduction of the Core line, and the Core V51 is by no means an exception to this. The V51, although advertised as a mid-tower, but I would classify it as a full tower due to the sheer size of being 540mm high, 236mm wide, and 560mm long. Price-wise, this case is creeping into Master Case 5 territory at $138, but it has been built with a modular concept in design, so you decide if they pulled it off to justify this price tag. Let's take a tour of the case to start off with. The front cover is removable and houses a mesh filter for dust intake control. Starting from the bottom is a removable dust filter that spans half the length of the case and is only accessible after removing the front cover. Next up is two 120mm 3-pin fans, two 5¼ bays with removable sleds that can be replaced with this cover to allow the placement of another 120, or you can have two 140mm fans with full radiator support included on the inside. For the I/O we have two USB 3.0 connectors, a large circular power button that lights up blue, a hard drive activity light, reset switch, and microphone and headphone jacks. I feel for a case this large to not include an extra two USB ports is a bit disappointing. On the left hand side is this enormous side panel window to show off all the interior. The side panel removes with two captive thumb screws and swings out first before being able to slide out, which is an elegant solution to avoid dropping the panel. Speaking of the panel, it has very little flex to it and the window is constructed of plastic. Moving to the rear we find three grommets to support water cooling, an I/O shield cutout, 120mm fan but does support up to a 140mm, 8 PCI brackets, a small bracket to hold a few cables such as your mouse or Ethernet cable for cleaner routing, a power supply cutout which can support any size power supply with ease, and a large dust filter for the power supply itself. At the back is another easy remove solid metal panel with an extended middle section so as not to impede with any cables behind it. At the bottom of the case is four very large feet with foam padding which raises the case enough to have the power supply intake face downwards without causing any issues. On the inside of the case is five 3.5-inch toolless drive sleds, but if you wish to use 2.5-inch drives you will have to attach to the drive sled with screws as the toolless design cannot hold the drive. To install a hard drive, first unlatch the sled and pull it out, before removing the two side snap locks and inserting your drive. After that, reattach the two plastic snap locks and insert the drive back into the hard drive sled before relatching it, allowing the drive to lock comfortably into the cage. The 5 sleds are housed in two separate cages, with the top supporting 2 drives and the bottom supporting 3, but these can be reconfigured to your preference or removed entirely by removing the thumb screws located at the side and rear to allow for a thicker radiator or push-pull fan support. Graphics card support is limited to 350mm long if the hard drive cages are installed, or 515mm when removed, which is more than enough space. Speaking of support, the case can house up to a 200mm tall CPU heatsink, which is more than enough room. At the top of the case, underneath a large magnetic dust filter, is support for up to a 420mm radiator, with 120mm variants also accepted. Instead of having static screw holes, Thermaltake have opted for channels, making it easier to mount your fans or radiator almost anywhere along the top of the case. These channels are also closer to the front of the case, so as not to impede with most motherboard heatsinks, which will allow you to use a thicker radiator if desired. On the bottom of the case is a metal bracket with two foam pads that can be moved forward or backwards by unscrewing the thumb screw either side of it and moving it in line with one of the 10 mounting holes along the bottom of it to adjust for optimal support for the length of your power supply. If your power supply is on the smaller side, you have the option to mount either a 120 or 240mm radiator on the floor of the case. Speaking of the power supply area, there is no cover or shroud, meaning your cable management will have to be top notch to look appealing through the side panel. There are several well-placed rubber grommets to help with clean cabling, except just above the motherboard tray, where instead there is this long skinny channel which leaves all cords routed at the top looking untidy unless you have a radiator covering this area. Over to the other side now, where Thermaltake have implemented this interesting hook concept which allows the placement of two of the drive sleds to be mounted at the rear if you do decide to remove caddies entirely, but still want drive support. Unfortunately, the bottom sled mount was poorly implemented and can cause cable routing issues due to being so close to the bottom of the case. If you do decide to keep the caddies in place, there are cutouts at the rear of each sled for cable routing, but you can only use a straight SATA cable here as the cutouts are not aligned properly, so a right angle cable will have to be bent upwards or route out of the hole below it, which is not a good design. There is no 2.5-inch sleds mounted behind the motherboard tray, unlike most other cases, especially at this price point, which is a bit of a letdown. There are a few cable tie points near each grommet, but none are present in the top right hand corner, which makes this area a lot harder to clean up. The overwhelming size of this case seems to scream for a complete custom water loop with front and top mounted radiators, but the case has no pump or reservoir support unless you are using something like a Bay-Res combo, which isn't very common these days. Even just building a regular system with something like a 240mm liquid cooler does make this large case feel a little empty, especially if you remove all the internals. I found building inside this case was very simple, even with all the issues I've addressed, but I feel I didn't have enough hardware to do this case justice. A few suggestions I have are a shroud to cover the exposed power supply and cables, especially if you don't have all black cables, better water cooling support for reservoir and pumps, and a few more USB connectors on the I/O. This case is overpriced in the modern day market unfortunately, so unless you're looking for a case with 5¼ inch bays or a decent amount of water cooling support, I would honestly stay away. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, and if you really enjoyed it, please consider subscribing for more reviews and other content in the future. If you have a suggestion, question or criticism, leave a comment, and thank you very much for watching.